Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Montana Book Festival and this virtual event. My name is Lauren Korn. I am the festival director this year. I want to welcome writers Kendra Atlework, Mary Oden, Joanna Pocock, and John Rember to this event. And I'll hand it over to them in a second, but I would like to introduce them. Kendra Atlework received her MFA in creative writing from the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. An essay that formed the basis for a chapter of Miracle Country was selected for the Best American Essays 2015. She is the recipient of the Ellen Malloy Desert Writers Award and the AWP Intro Journals Project Award. Mary Oden's essays have appeared in the Georgia Review, Northwest Review, Nimrod, the Alaska Quarterly Review, and Under Northern Lights, an anthology of contemporary Alaska art and writing. Born in Eastern Oregon, she traveled north to do forest fire work in Alaska. She studied writing at the University of Montana and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She has worked as an aviation dispatcher, village teen counselor, writing teacher, and as a publisher and editor of a small newspaper in Alaska's Copper River Valley. In 2015, she received a Rasmussen Foundation Individual Artist Award for the essays gathered in Mostly Water. She lives with her husband in Nelchina, Alaska. Joanna Pocock is an Irish-Canadian writer living in London, UK. Her essays, reviews, and travel pieces have appeared in Distinctly Montana, Litro, The Sunday Independent, The Los Angeles Times, The Nation, Orion, Tahoma Literary Review, 3 AM, and on the Dark Mountain blog. She was a finalist for the Barry Lopez Narrative Nonfiction Prize in 2017 and won the 2018 Fitzcarraldo Editions Essay Prize for Surrender. She teaches creative writing at the University of the Arts in London and works as a freelance editor for a variety of publishers. John Rember lives and writes in the Sawtooth Valley of Idaho. Recurring themes in his writing include the meaning of place, the impact of tourism on the West, and the fragility of industrial civilization. His books include 100 Little Pieces on the End of the World, Traplines Coming Home to Sawtooth Valley, MFA in a Box, a Why to Write book, Sudden Death Over Time, Cheerleaders from Gomorrah, Tales from the Lycra Archipelago, and Coyote in the Mountains, and Other Stories. Welcome, John, Joanna, Mary, and Kendra.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we're going to start by reading a little bit from each of our books and describing our books so that everybody watching can get a sense of where the directions our conversation will go. So I'll start. So this is my book. It's called Miracle Country. It's a memoir with a lot of research in it. It's my debut book. Came out in July from Algonquin Books. And it tells the story of, so I'm talking to you from Bishop, California, which is currently so smoky that it looks like it's storming, but it's not, it's just smoke. So as much of California and the West is experiencing right now. So my book, Miracle Country, it opens with a wildfire in 2015 during the heart of the California drought that burned my childhood neighborhood. And I flew home on a red-eye flight and sifted the ash with the neighbors looking for anything that had survived. And Miracle Country opens with this event and it leaps around through time. It's not really a chronological memoir. It tracks my relationship to my home place. I was raised in the mountains in the high desert of the Eastern Sierra Nevada, and I live now again in Bishop, here in where I grew up. And my parents were sort of quirky people that met here. My dad was a hot air balloon pilot. My mom was a school teacher, and they were both drawn to this sort of harsh and wild and beautiful landscape. And they raised me to love this place. But then when I was 16, my mom died and I took off, I left home. I was gone for a decade. And during that decade, I was haunted by homesickness of this place that I had abandoned. And I started to research it. So Miracle Country tells the story of my relationship to my home as it evolves, as I learn more, as I dig into the water history, because our water goes to Los Angeles and has for over 100 years and enables the city to be as large as it is. And I looked into that. I looked into the way that the valley was settled and the genocide of the indigenous people here. And so the story of my home parallels the story of my family as I come to have a deeper understanding of both. And in the end, decided to move home and live behind and beside some of my most difficult memories, and also beside this sort of troubled history of this place that I love, which is also frequently visited by natural disaster, and being part of the Desert West is on the front lines of climate change. So I'm going to read a very short passage the loss in my own family's life of my mom, it came to parallel to me a lot of losses on the level of the landscape. And I came to terms with this loss by sort of thinking about public loss in the sense of the water that my valley had lost, in the sense of what we stand to lose as the climate changes. So I will read a short passage that I think sort of marries those themes. Not long ago, Pop reminded me that Mom's 60th birthday was not far away, that within the next 5 or so years, she would have retired from her job with the schools and might want to live in Bishop instead of on the mountainside in Swall, which would make her my neighbor. Pop said how different our lives would be. Every once in a while, for just a moment, he imagines her into place. After the fire, when a friend of Pop's learned that our house survived, he looked at my father with a half smile and pointed with one finger to the sky. It's what they all say, someone's watching over you. The moon shone awfully bright in those days, but who can't look to the face of the moon and find a trace of what's missing? And yet, in the first spring without her, I, sworn teenaged atheist, felt what I could only describe as her presence in the pre-dawn sky over Wheeler and Tom, looking west from my window in the depths of night when I could not sleep for fear of the sleep she had entered. A paleness along the ridge, and above it, the stars. It was the same ridge that burned years later, but perhaps because I had seen it so still and softly glowing, so touched by peace, I was able to look at it blackened and not despair. Some who love this valley remember its first name, the land of flowing waters, Payahunadu. Now we see it washed in fire. We live in a landscape damaged beyond repair, and we see our loss magnified the world over. We are here regardless, learning how to keep an eye on mystery and miracle where they flicker beside disaster. My sister reminds me years later, the night Mom died, we asked to know that we could go on. The 4 of us walked to the top of the hill together, Kayla remembers, the place Pop once called sacred, safe from stalking mountain lions. And we were sitting in that spot, you know, that spot where we go at the top of the hill. And the clouds were thick and covering the moon, and suddenly they parted, and there was a rainbow around the moon, the light reflecting off ice crystals. Listen, 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 wind in the Jeffrey pines, and at that curve in the road, Wheeler crests soaring at our backs. I held my brother's small, soft hand and Pop's chafed one. It was hard to stay with them when I wanted to be the night wind and fly away. But the meadows beneath us and the windows of our neighbors glowed, and there was something good in not being alone. And now I will kick it to Mary.
That's one of the passages I hope that you would read. I think our essay, whoa, I just lost the screen here. My goodness. Well, maybe it doesn't matter. If you can still see me, I'll just carry on. Yes, so these books are really different. I guess in form, John and mine are essays. But Kendra's book combines a lot of the things, the connections for me, wildfire, and also what kind of response should we have to the grief and the loss that we experience on personal level and in the environment. And I enjoyed the humor of John's saying that we inappropriately appropriate ideas from scientists, but our world of grief and loss with the environment, what we perceive, is so very tied up with scientific ideas. I like the idea of the moon and the earth, their gravity has slowed one another. We've fixed the moon's face on ours. Kendra's passage, looking at the moon, reminds me of that, and the earth, in fact, is slowing to. We humans probably won't get to see it, but it's slowing, and will at some point face the moon indefinitely. I hope that love is like that gravity. I'm going to read from Lingonberries. My book is essays written over a long time, probably almost 30 years. And this short little piece, it punctuates one of the longer pieces, is important to me because yesterday I was picking lingonberries, and I'm reminded of this time when they were injured. The North is a region, as we talk about the Northwest America being a region. A lot of times that's meant being marginalized in literature, perhaps. But I think that rural places and regional places are so no longer isolated from harm that in some ways we are the epicenter of harm. The seas are rising, the storms are getting worse. Alaskan villages are washing away. The bottoms are falling out of lakes as the permafrost leaves. Pollutants drift north. We're finding them. The scientists that we depend upon are finding them in the lakes. And we share with all rural places the messes that have been left from resource extraction. And people are looking for beauty, as they have, visitors come, they do it in kind of a surface way. And I think we have to look to the people who have always lived here and not forget their responses. So, lingonberry sauce. After Chernobyl, the berries were injured. It happened in the spring on April 26, 1986, my husband's 35th birthday. Native women from Alaska sent meat, fish, and berries to Laplanders in the fall because during the event, Chernobyl poisoned the ground with radioactive cesium-137, a water-soluble isotope that plants and animals take up like salt. The people closest to the Chernobyl reactor and all the people downwind of the shifting plumes being emitted by the ruined power plant could not safely subsist off the land. Lingonberries are low bush cranberries that grow in forests all over the top of the world. The Kobuk Inupiat call them kikminyuk, and women's hands stroke them from the hillside into deep birch bark baskets. Finlanders call them poaluka. In eastern Canada, they are foxberries or red berries. In Norway and Denmark, they are tyttebær, and the Swedes gave their lingon name to us. They are in the genus Vaccinium with blueberries, which their stems often touch. But when blueberries are soft and shriveled and their red leaves have vanished in the fall winds, the lingonberries are ready to pick, and their tiny waxy oval leaves will be green under the snow all winter. In the summer, we watched the clouds of Russian forest fire smoke drift over our short forests until the wind shifts and we send them our Alaskan smoke, waiting for the smoke from Canada's Yukon to drift in from the east. The world is small at its top, the center of a spinning disk. Pick the berries after 1 or 2 frosts, after they are red all over, but before too many frosts have softened them. Pick it bucketfuls. Pour your berries from one bucket to the other in a stiff wind, or while your friend flaps a big piece of cardboard to blow away sticks and leaves. The berries will sound like hard rain as they fall on each other, filling your bucket with red, opaque jewels. They will keep all winter in a cool room. Use them by the handful when you need them, or make a sauce for meat. You can eat the sauce on bread too, or stir it into pudding. Maury's second chief told Norman to eat a spoonful every day to stay healthy. To eat lingonberries is to taste the bright, sour heart of spruce and poplar woods in the late fall, when the winds that blow across the north have turned cold and the ground is waiting for snow. I am comforted to know that wind does not belong to anyone. The mercy we could give the forest is for ourselves. Beauty, danger, and comfort are human things, and they will not outlive us. Thanks.
Beautiful. both Kendra and Mary, you read sections from your books that were some of my favorite passages. All three books I loved so much. So I'm going to read from Surrender. I guess that's the Canadian American edition. It was published in the UK first, and actually it's being published in Quebec and France in about a month. The book was written, most of it was written over 2 years when I was living in Missoula. And it was a sort of strange confluence of reasons that brought me there. I've sort of been quite a rootless person my whole life. And when I was approaching middle age, I kind of had this urge to try and find my place on the planet. So I'm going to read a very short bit from the beginning that slightly sets the scene, and then I'll read a little something later on in the book. We all hit the middle of our lives at some point. When my sister Mary turned 26, did she have any idea she would be dead at 52? Not a clue. What we call our midlife crisis often doesn't hit the midpoint of our lives unless we live into our 80s, 90s, and beyond, which many of us won't. A better term for midlife crisis is the less grandiose sounding, but perhaps more accurate word, ennui. By a certain age, we simply get bored of the rhythm of our days, the commute to work on a packed train, the rush to get a child ready for school, the smell of car fumes as we sit in traffic, the dog whining for its walk. We tire of our living spaces and how the light hits a certain wall each afternoon. We sicken at the sight of the same smudge of sky from our beds, the piles of laughing gas canisters in the gutter, the seemingly endless whoosh of greasy styrofoam fried chicken containers, blowing down the pavement after the pubs close. And the pubs, even they seem threadbare and dull or loud and violent. We begin to realize that we have more past than future. The known is eclipsing the unknown. We panic and plan our escape, whether that be via psychedelic drugs, taking up a religion or ditching the one we have, quitting our jobs, taking up a fresh partner, joining a polyamorous community, all in the belief we are heading towards that magical thing, freedom. Whatever form it takes, midlife often arrives in a package with a bright red self-destruct button attached. The midlife crisis package I was handed came in a box marked with one simple word, Montana. The American West was calling us. And then I outlined the very strange reasons that led us there, lots of sort of coincidences, and I have a tendency to try and follow coincidences when they come into my life. And while I was living in Montana, part of what I was really trying to do was to try and work out an answer to the question that was really kind of obsessing me, which was how to live on a dying planet with joy or with some kind of feeling that perhaps I wasn't part of the problem. And it led me to meet all kinds of people, lots of different types of rewilders and people going out after, mining, clearing up rivers after mining companies had gone and destroyed them, ecosexuals, preppers, scavengers, all kinds of people that I felt would maybe help me answer the question of how to live on the dying planet with joy. And I think one of the main people who is the heart and soul of the book is a woman called Fenicia Medrano, who was born a man in Nevada in 1956 and became a woman in the 70s. And for 35 years, she lived on horseback, sort of replanting what she called the wild gardens of the West. And she sadly died April 3rd this year on my daughter's 13th birthday. She died of a heart attack, which is tragic because she was truly phenomenal. So this is a short passage about meeting Fenicia for the first time. Eve, who's my daughter, noticed the horses first, and then the lean-to along the side of the road next to a wooden fence and a collapsing outhouse. French Glen sits in a lush, grassy valley irrigated by small meandering canals. It was an oasis in the eastern Oregon desert. A dark green tarp was stretched across 6 poles at waist height. 8 horses stood in a homemade paddock with a single electric wire wrapped around the makeshift corral to keep them from running away. Jason, my husband, parked up as Phoenicia emerged from under her tarp to greet us. She was dressed in her trademark wide buckskin skirt, large brimmed leather hat, and despite the June heat, a thin wool sweater. Her long uncombed hair spread across her shoulders. The lines on her weather-worn face had the detail of a Dorothea Lange photo. She stuck her roll-up in her mouth to shake my hand. As soon as I said hello, she started immediately in a deep-voiced and very fast delivery to tell me about my domestication. The problem with you is that even your internal flora have been domesticated. It takes 40 to 50 days to acclimatize to a wild food diet, and some people begin to starve in that time. She was not interested in the social niceties of small talk. This could have been the result of 30 years of solitude on the hoop, or simply because Phoenicia wanted, above all else, to get her message across. The earth is dying, and those of us who do not throw off our domestication are responsible for its death. The type of slow, painful starvation I would experience if I were to live Phoenicia's hunter-gatherer life could be prevented by the administration of warm spring bear poop as a high colonic enema. How do you administer it? I asked. You know, with one of those rubber whoop-de-doo things, she said, drawing a roller coaster shape in the air with her finger. Those of us who are domesticated may suffer a fever from such an enema, but once that has passed and we have survived, our insides would be rewilded and we would achieve food freedom. Until then, I remained an ecocidal whore of Babylon, Babylon being her name for civilization. Thank you.
I wrote a book on the end of the world, and lo and behold, it sort of came true. So what I've found that has happened since the pandemic began is that a lot of what was in my book was various scenarios. One of them happened to hit on something pretty similar to our reality right now. But I had enough scenarios that I had pretty good chance of something happening that I had predicted in the book. What has become the most important part of the book is how you face the world that is ending, and how the small spaces that we live in, the small kindnesses that we do for each other are really the important thing. And so the meaning of the book has changed. The vision that I had was of a world that most people were encountering a sort of Stockholm syndrome in themselves, because at some level, most of us know we can't live without civilization. And that if civilization does fall, and it seems likely to, a lot of people are going to die. And so we're in the position of sort of hoping it goes on and on and on, even as it's destroying our habitat. I'm a little different than Joanna suggests about a dying world. I don't think the Earth is really going to be in trouble as long as you're speaking in terms of geologic time. I think humanity is going to be a fleeting phenomenon. But that still is a bit disturbing when you look at humanity being on the verge of extinction. At Joanna's suggestion, I'm reading a short section from my chapter on visiting Vietnam as a tourist. And I have, having been a travel writer and worked for Travel and Leisure and a lot of the ski magazines, I've got a somewhat jaundiced view of tourism, having been one for so much of my life. We arrive at Nha Trang, the tourist city just up the coast from Cam Ranh Bay. A week before we arrive, an international tourist organization has listed Nha Trang as one of the 10 worst beach towns in the world. We don't know that when we check into the Havan Hotel, where friendly people usher us to a nice $20 room that comes with the best breakfast we'll have in Vietnam. We don't know that when we discover the Louisiana Brew House across the shore highway from the Havan, where you can sit by the pool all morning in 80-degree sunshine, drinking good Czech beer and reading the cold parts of Dr. Zhivago until it's time to eat lunch at poolside or in the attached restaurant. We don't know that when we visit its Cham Dynasty towers, 1,000-year-old ruins that have been restored on a hill at the north end of town. We especially don't know that when, on the way back from the towers, we find an inexpensive Indian restaurant on a narrow back street right across from an ATM. If you dine upstairs at the Indian restaurant, you look across the street to a clothing factory where the teenaged workers get ready for bed right next to their sewing machines. They look out at you with eyes 100 years old. They see you looking back at them, and you both realize how unbridgeable the gap is between you, how improbable for each is the gaze of the other. The blinds come down with a snap. You go back to your beer and lamb vindaloo. These things are hardly the stuff of 10 worst lists. Perhaps the sin that Nha Trang has committed is sprawling into a miles-long international party, a 20-story carnival of shopping, eating, and drinking on a gorgeous white sand half-moon beach. It doesn't help that the beach lies between two fog-topped mountain headlands and faces a soft blue bay full of dark green islands. Like many of the world's inhumanly beautiful places, this one has been reduced to the limits of human imagination by its tourist industry. There's a kind of headless chicken momentum to Nha Trang, even when it's clear that much more success as a tourist attraction will kill what was the attraction in the first place. But even so, Nha Trang is in less danger of reaching that point than Koh Samui or Pattaya in Thailand. Its boom comes at the wrong moment in history. We want to go back in another 10 years. We'd like another week around the pool at the Louisiana Brew House. We'd like to see what becomes of a place built on middle-class purchases of airline tickets once the middle class has ceased to exist. That's one of the things you do as a travel writer is you try to make your own experience a synecdoche for everybody else's experience. And I suppose that's, I hope that's as disturbing to you as it is to me.
Can
I think in,
Go ahead, Mary.
I think in Alaska, the experience of tourism is in one way is the preservation of stereotypes that it preserves and twists, even as, some of the authentic things are still there. It twists everyone out of shape. And I like what Kendra said about tourism as well. Quoting David Foster Wallace, a tourist is a bug on a dead thing. So as a response to what's happening in the world, the seeking of inauthentic, what turns out to be inauthentic responses is destructive. I'll sit back having thrown that out.
I wonder what others who live, I think we all live in, we either all live now in a tourist town or we are all have spent a lot of time studying places heavily visited by tourists. I live in a town of about 12,000 that gets a visitation of several million passing through annually. So that's quite a contrast. And I found that David Foster Wallace quote, "Tourist is a bug on a dead thing," but I kind of the reason why I can bear to live here and why I came back is because I see it not so much as a bug on a dead thing, but a thing that's being kept alive by the people who have really invested in it and dug in and sort of help that place maintain its some kind of integrity of character, despite being kind of like a sieve in other ways, which includes talking to the people that are coming to visit and making the place more nuanced to them and writing about it and sort of facilitating them to have a more real relationship with it. Because I think every place that's popular with tourists needs stewards all over the world to not become just completely destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of see tourism as part of, yeah, it's part of the greater kind of monster that's yeah, eating the world in a sense. And I think the passage that John read out, where you can be a tourist sitting in a restaurant and you're literally looking into the eyes of someone who's a garment worker, a seamstress, I seem to remember, and that unbridgeable gap is exactly what the system has created, hasn't it? And I think in a way one can be too harsh on people who are just actually, might want to, I don't know, go to Bavaria, go to Yosemite, go to wherever it is they've always wanted to go out of a sort of genuine desire for enrichment. But unfortunately, the way it's now done is part of what's destroying the planet. So like so much of what's going on right now, I just see it as a conundrum. Like I don't feel I have the answer to that problem. And I like so many problems at the moment, they feel somewhat insurmountable to me, which I think is partly why I keep writing. Maybe it's partly why we all keep writing, is to try and explore these problems that feel insurmountable.
Well, what if they are insurmountable? And that's unfortunately my position, that what I've noticed, and I've been in this valley since I was 3, which makes it 66 years now. So what I've noticed is that over the years, tourism has become more and more alienated from the valley, from the locals. A tourist industry is just that. So it begins to build this infrastructure, and the infrastructure over time becomes the reality, and the understructure gets completely covered up. I find that it's a creation of a paid for experience ultimately results in a kind of inauthenticity that begins to affect both the people who experience it and the people who deliver the experience. So I don't know where it all ends up, but I do know that Idaho, for all its expansiveness as a state, if you take away the mountainous areas, the areas that you really have to work to get to, it's about the size of Delaware, and that most of that is private land with no trespassing signs on it. So in the beginning, I mean, most people who show up to Idaho are living an idea, and they have a certain narrative that they're following, and that narrative has been created for them. I'm sure it happens. Well, I certainly know it happens in London, and having been to Alaska, I know it happens in Alaska. So I'm not sure where we go with this, except maybe pick up on Joanna's point that this is just part of a great big machine, which is sort of rendering the planet into dust as we're going.
I guess I feel a little bit more hopeful in some ways because I see tourism, there's so many different kinds of tourism, right? So I live my town of Bishop in the Owens Valley, Payahunadu, is about 5 hours, a little bit less from LA. And I went to college in LA with kids who lived in concrete worlds, but would once a summer could pretty cheaply come up with their families and camp and fish in the Eastern Sierra. And that's happening. We're having a record-breaking season. And on the one hand, we're having record-breaking amounts of awful trash and unattended campfires, and it's a disaster. But on the other hand, we're having record-breaking numbers of people come and experience an environment that's totally different from their own, and then go home with that experience. And I feel like if it's curated in a certain way, that can actually have a ripple effect that can be really good, where you have people coming to know and love a place that isn't their home, and then maybe they take some of that and that transfers to how they think about their own home as well. And I'm being too optimistic in thinking that kind of the ability to travel and to see, and if you can deeply experience someone else's home, if we can kind of present tourist spaces as a home to the people that are visiting and not just as a place that you come and throw your trash, then maybe there is some degree of deeper thought that goes back with them when they leave. And partly I feel like that because I've gotten a lot of emails since my book came out in July. People are like, oh, I read Miracle Country. I've been coming to the Eastern Sierra every summer since I was 7. And I love it so much. And I can't live there because, you know, my job is in the city, but I have this deep love for this place that is so different from my home. And I want to understand it. So when that happens, I feel like it's kind of what we need. We sort of need to be able to see those connections between ourselves and place. And in some ways, tourism can facilitate that.
Yeah, I'd like to say that there's a dangerous thing that I experienced, speaking only from myself, being of my generation, is the curmudgeon factor, where
I have no idea what that means.
okay. In the Rosalie Sorrell's song, there's an old guy sitting at the bar with his whiskey, and he says, "My age was golden and yours ain't worth brass." And I think we have to avoid that. And I hear the doors opening in what you're saying, Kendra. And I think to be with younger people, to work with students, is a way to see those possibilities of transformation that every human is capable of. And I would just like to say, maybe decentering it away from tourism, but for anyone trying to reach the authentic of a place, that we not make it a contest between the old and the new, and the old ideas and the new ideas, but that we know that we're standing on other people's shoulders. It's why we haven't thrown Shakespeare away yet. So we have to respect history, the history of philosophy, which John does so well, and look at the layers in the places that we visit and recognize that every place we step on has a history, a lot of which we do not know. And I think, Kendra, one of the things I love about your book is that you so beautifully bring the past into the present. You have the butterflies in the ears of the Spanish explorers. You have the loss of the water. You have the Paiute, and the later history of the ghost dance. It's all there in the present. It's in the grief of that you experience in losses and changes in your family. I think if we could, as witnesses on the earth, always walk with the awareness of the things that we can't know, of what has gone before, and respect those things, that would make our response more appropriate to the present.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what you said, Kendra, about this idea of sort of deepening people's understanding or awareness of a place. And I think it kind of also touches on this idea that, you know, the earth is a web of ecosystems and it is all connected. And whether you are visiting Yosemite or Scotland or wherever, that actually your awareness of place, as you just said, Mary, you know, comes with an understanding of history and people. And I guess that's that sort of sense of connection to place, regardless of where it is something that I do feel that a kind of consumerist culture has you know, tries to kind of erode. And I think that's something that through writing one can perhaps try and make people a bit more aware of that somehow. But yeah.
And you have to acknowledge that without ecotourism, there would be fewer species on the planet right now, and some of those are charismatic megafauna. Julie and I sort of have a joking, ongoing conversation about the Custer County Curmudgeon Club, and it has 4 C's on the front, and on the back it says, "Hell no, you can't join." But I do think that we're in a position to start maybe listening to curmudgeons as we have never listened before, because, you know, Jeremiah was a curmudgeon, and all of a sudden he's appearing to be a prophet for our times. I don't know what I appreciate the attempts to bridge between two groups of people, but I also look at the effect of what happens on the curators. And so in Idaho, we have, with 80-some% federal land, we have federal agencies who are curating our federal lands. And they have become people that you don't admire, I guess. That's one of the lessons I take away from it. There's a definite progression when you start increasing the number of people who come to a beautiful place to experience it and to love it, that eventually the people who are curating it it begins to operate like a feedlot. You get them in, you feed them, you get them out, and what you feed them becomes increasingly standardized. So, you know, I'm not very cheerful about this, but I take a lot of guidance from William Burroughs' introduction to Naked Lunch, where he says, let's, for just a minute, look at what's on the end of our forks, and what are we consuming? And you know, the implication is that it's causing the destruction of a lot of things whose only sin is to want to live. So I'm not sure we want to spend all our time on tourism unless you really want to see a rant. But it's hard for me to see where we go from here.
Can I ask you actually a question to all of you, but relates sort of on the back of that, John, is how does the act of writing, where, you know, how does that function with all these ideas in our heads, some of which are quite, you know, quite desperate and sad and despairing, and some are maybe more hopeful, and how does the act of writing figure in all this for you all?
I think that witnessing is a big part of it. And I noticed this about everybody's book. Everybody here does a lot of witnessing of how people live in their homes, even if that means going to that place as a tourist and learning from those people, which is, I think, the kind of like as Mary said, authentic visiting that can be really good. Like Mary writes about how rural people in the North live in their homes. And then Joanna writes about like all these communities in the American West that I didn't even know existed. And John writes about many different communities and how they're living in their homes. And I think that's a big part for me of where writing comes in is there's this book that I just finished reading by Anthony Mara. And in one of the scenes, it's about Russia for the most part in the Soviet Union. In one of the scenes, there's a group standing outside of a prison, and a famous Russian poet is amongst this group, and the women are waiting to learn the outcome of their men who've been taken into this prison for various perceived political crimes. And she turns to the poet and she says, "Can you write what this is like? Can you tell this story?" And so I think that is a big part of every writer's job. And then in the case of people who have zeroed in on place and environment, telling how people are living and have lived in these places, both people like and unlike the writer themselves, is really, I think, quite important.
Yeah.
I think I think one of the things that happens in this witnessing is that because I don't really believe that even people in their own families really understand each other. The kinds of communication that we do are always inadequate. And I like the idea that I heard a philosophy professor say that was in the Hindu realm, that there's there's a me, there's a you, but there's a in between us that's almost a corporal reality that's created when we try to communicate. It's the not me, it's the not you, it's the in between. And that the kind of witnessing that writing can do is to reach into that space, because you're writing for not to a person who's sitting in front of you, but to the imagined audience, and you want to give them their best shot at trying to understand what's in your mind. And this is an old person thing, but I just read a book about trees, which is very important. Tell me the name of that book, someone, that I just read. But what it does is decenter the human story a bit in favor of the natural world, and in particular the world of trees. And I think that this is just a particular task that writing is doing now. In Alaska, in the north, there's a book called Floating Coast by Bathsheba Demuth, an environmental history of the Bering Strait, which does its thing with human history and prehistory, certainly the whaling, but it reaches into Russia, which is a blank unknown for most of us, and the history there. And really importantly, it reaches into the natural history of whales and walruses and what's happened in the ocean over this entire period of interaction with humans. And the effect of this is to widen out an idea of history to include the non-human and make us one. And one more, if anyone has not read Eva Salidas' Into Great Silence, about what's happened to the orca whales after the oil spill, the transient orcas. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. Shout out to Eva Salidas' Into Great Silence, which touches on things that we've been talking about. Okay, I always have a lot to say. I'll sit back now.
In line with books that witness on behalf, that I like how you said that, decentering the human and witnessing on behalf of the non-human. I'll also mention Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which I assume we've all read. that one really helped me think about reciprocity and kind of not being so human centrist.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful book. But do any of you also find the actual act of writing? I mean, I know for me, I'll often be confronted by something, witness something, to use that word, and I don't really know what I think, or I don't really know how to make sense of it until I start writing about it. And just actually the sheer act of putting words down, forming words for thoughts, for me, untangles a lot. And I think that's one of the reasons I sort of keep doing it, even when at times maybe I feel a bit despairing, like John. I sort of, I'm sort of juggling all these different emotions all the time. But then when I come to write it, it somehow alleviates feelings of despair or worry. I don't know if any of you feel that way as well.
And in genre as well, we're all nonfiction writers, and we have 3 essay collections and 1 memoir, but I would also say it could easily be called a book-length essay. It's not really a memoir. It's a memoir in the sense it's about my family, but Miracle Country, like it's an essay, right? I wonder if you guys felt that way, but I like that idea of like processing through writing in a way that like is much more cathartic, and I think productive in what you end up saying than just reacting. It just invites so much nuance. So I wonder in others' response to that question, if you also, I'm curious how your choice of genre factored in as well.
I would, well, I'll defer to anyone else at this point. I believe in witnessing. It's an archetype that we don't pay much attention to, but we would be very grateful if we had someone who didn't want to be a philosopher in Rome in 410 AD, but instead just simply wrote down what was happening day to day to day. That would be an incredibly valuable document right now. So the witness is something that is devalued by our culture. We don't really pay attention. We accuse them of creating a separate piece, when in fact what they're really trying to do is to record what is really happening with an honesty that probably doesn't enter into things if you're more engaged in the struggles.
I think in a way we're very fortunate to have this genre of creative nonfiction, whether you want to call it essay or memoir or hybrid. And Kendra, I sort of see yours as a hybrid. I don't think it really matters whether it's memoir, it's just a wonderful narrative work of narrative nonfiction. And I think it allows us to occupy a space that maybe is where honesty is allowed, unlike perhaps more mainstream journalism or straightforward reporting now, which I feel is so difficult. I think it's wonderful that this space does exist for us, and particularly in the United States. I think it's perhaps more seen as more of a space there than in Europe, I think. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I want to do a commercial for first person accounts, and they get kind of devalued as oh, that's just doing the primary research, and then we process it and we make a book. There is, when you ask someone a question and you turn them loose, and I used to try to do this with our little paper that we had for a while. I would record everything they had to say, and then I just put it in as a chunk. And that was different than articles I tried to write, where I tried to understand something in process and used research. But the people who do oral history, even the people who interview politicians, whoever you're interviewing, if we would sometimes let those accounts stand by themselves so that we could experience the point of view of that person in the most primary way and not try to cover it with our interpretations. Those things are important too, but we need to look at first person accounts and oral history in order to understand the times that those people lived in and are living in, and that is an elemental witnessing, and I think it's a little bit undervalued right now.
Why do you think it is undervalued, out of interest?
Maybe because so many people want to be pundits and give their interpretation of what's happening. I see books in Alaska that are interviews and oral history that I think give understanding in a way that some of the interpreters can't give. I might be reaching for something that's difficult. I'll sit back, but we need to listen to the primary voices of the people who are willing to offer them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things that really struck me early on was, well, when you started talking about Phoenicia, one of the first things she does is starts to cry. And it strikes me that what writers do is we articulate impossible things for people, at least for people who have found them impossible. And I cried when I read Mary's first chapter, where she talks about her father just sort of running up against these invisible forces that frustrated him again and again and again. And he didn't have the words to even get close to them. And, you know, I see this in the West all the time, that it's inhabited by people who have this fierce love for what they're doing and where they're living. And when you ask them why, they can't answer. Yeah. In fact, a lot of them will say, I don't love it, I hate it. You know. Or as
so writing
says, I don't hate it, I don't hate it. Sorry.
So writing in one of its functions then is to articulate what other people have found inarticulate, not express. I mean, I try to understand my father, and writing in what Joanna says too, writing is thinking. And so in writing about my father, I try to articulate what I think those impassable boundaries are for him. So that's one thing that writers do, right?
And I think putting things into context, I noticed when I was visiting some of the sort of, I don't know what you, counterculture or some of the people who sort of living quite sort of off the grid and away from people, and they didn't understand why I would be interested in them. And one of the things I sort of would often say is, I'm trying to sort of contextualize your life. I'm trying to see it from a sort of somehow like a perspective from further away, and somehow make links between things. And again, I think writing can do that. It can allow you to kind of witness, experience things, and then perhaps weave them together somehow that maybe, I don't know, it's not rewriting what people say, but it's somehow just putting them in a slightly different context, which maybe will allow other people to look at them and not go, oh, these people are just weird, you know, but maybe to see them in a way that makes them seem, of value, that perhaps maybe they wouldn't be seen as sort of valuable witnesses themselves. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
It does, but it's a hard sell. You know, I grew up in
Really hard
Oregon.
sell.
The Rajneeshi members of my family knew about that from the other side, and it's a real temptation to look at some of these responses as very shallow and kind of like locusts arriving in your field, in the field of Antelope, Oregon. So I appreciate the window. It was valuable what you did. It's not a West that I recognize very easily, and maybe that's the value of your book.
Well, it's written by an outsider, so you know it again, maybe there's an idea of, if you aren't from a place, I mean, I don't really know where I'm from or where I belong, but I think one of the things I was very conscious of as an outsider was people were very generous in wanting to sort of, oh, you need to go and see this mountain or this lake. It's, you know, it's so beautiful. And I just, as I was sort of experiencing Montana, not really knowing how long I was going to stay there, whether, you know, was this going to be where I landed forever? But my intuition was to sort of go under the surface. And then once you start scratching under the surface, I mean, there's no bottom to it. And I suppose I was trying on some level maybe to write about a place I'm not from, but that would perhaps allow outsiders, maybe this is going back to what Kendra was saying as well, to perhaps try in the best possible way I could to portray it in a way that would deepen it for other outsiders. And, you know, I think there is a value in that as well.
Yeah, Michael Pollan's idea of a lot of the ideas about the parks and restoration of lands and even the historic conservation movements is a return to an imaginary past or a point in time that perhaps didn't exist, like your Welsh word.
Oh, yeah, Hiraeth.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I like what Joanna said as well about putting surprising things in conversation, which I think is the job of writers in any genre, and is especially well suited to the essay and nonfiction in general, since writing is thinking and we're following these seemingly unconnected threads, and then it's the writer's job to put them next to each other so that the reader can then make their own connections. And I think that can be a really powerful way to sort of encourage deeper thinking and deeper discourse in a way that that is often lacking as bestsellers get shorter and shorter, and as social media becomes the way that discourse happens, which I think is great for connecting people, but not great for maintaining nuance in what we're saying and how we're evaluating opinions we maybe disagree with or ideas we've never encountered before. So I think kind of putting the reader in an uncomfortable space, in the sense that you have to draw some connections between things that you might not have otherwise thought of putting next to each other. And it also, I think, is useful as witness too. And you can be in conversation with history. Like my book, Miracle Country, I'm in an ongoing conversation with William Mulholland, the engineer of the Los Angeles Aqueduct, who died in the 30s. And yet I have a relationship with him that I can have through this wrestling process that is writing. And I see similar things in all of our books. And I think that's really has a lot of potential for pushing discussions of things that we think are important.
Beautifully said.
So I'm just going to jump in. We're sort of nearing or a little past the hour mark, but I'm wondering if you can each kind of recommend books to our viewers, or tell each other what books you're reading right now that kind of follow these threads or these themes. And I know in conversations leading up to this particular conversation, many of you wanted to recommend books that were maybe not prominent in the environmental writing canon. I thought that was a really wonderful idea, but I thought I'd just throw that out there if you wanted to throw some titles for our viewers out into the internet for them.
I've got a couple right here. I'm reading these two together, and this one, I think this has been out for a while because it's already out in paperback, and it's a PEN Literary Award finalist, so it's well on its way to entering the canon. But this is Trace, which is by Laurette Savoy. The subtitle is Memory, History, Race in the American Landscape, and I'll read a little blurb from the New York Magazine about it, which summarizes it better than I will. They said, wherein John McPhee meets James Baldwin, dissolves all academic boundaries. Trace is a memoir, a meditation on landscape and identity, and a travelogue with the mission. So I'm reading this and I'm really enjoying it. It's a really interesting look at place-based writing. And then alongside it, I'm reading this book, which is Spirit Run by Noe Alvarez. And the subtitle of this is a 6,000-mile marathon through North America's stolen land. And the author is the son of Mexican immigrants, and he grew up in Yakima, Washington, working beside his mom in an apple packing plant, and then dropped out of college to run a native-led marathon across North America, meant to renew cultural connections. So they both touch on things that we talked about in this conversation, and ideas of tourism, ideas of visiting places you're not from, ideas of thinking really deeply about where you are from, home, history, witnessing, all of that stuff. So, yeah.
I'd love to add two that I've just read. I don't have them with me, they're in the other room, but one was by a First Nations young Canadian writer called, I don't know how to pronounce her name, I might get it wrong, but it's Therese Mayo or Malho, and it's called Heartberries, and it's absolutely wonderful. It's a memoir of growing up, and it's just absolutely stunning piece of writing. And another one I read recently is Tommy Orange, There There, which is a novel, not a memoir, but very much about sort of native, but from a not rural city, sort of the native experience growing up in a city. Again, absolutely stunning, beautiful, totally recommend it. Yeah, those would be my two favorites lately.
That one's great. That's that's Oakland, right?
Yeah, Oakland, yeah, fantastic.
I think I've already done my commercial. I can't hold up the books because I keep giving them away. But for sure, Eva Salinas, Integrate Silence, beautiful book.
I've written that down.
And there is definitely an interest in promoting Indigenous and rural voices. One of the places, Denali Sunrise Publications has been an aggregator of those voices and has reviewed Heartberries and They're There, and also the books that I've talked about. So thank you for your recommendations.
I'd like to go back quite a few years to recommend my books, but one of them is R.D. Laing's Politics of Experience, and the other is Ernest Becker's Denial of Death. And both of those books are deeply intertwined with the way a culture constructs a reality. And it does help a witness to sort of step out of a reality and look at it from the outside, and then begin to recognize that there are a good many other realities. And certainly that's when you begin to recognize the value of other cultures, because the way our culture, our industrial technological culture, is constructing reality is not very good, and it's beginning to get a little frayed around the edges.
It would have been nice to be able to talk more about Jeremy Bentham's head.
Well, yeah. I would have liked to have talked about Jeremy Bentham's head. I've been sort of fascinated with Jeremy Bentham's head ever since they took it off and mummified it. But, you know,
And to encounter Kendra's discussion of the greatest good throughout the book after reading John's book was to recognize a huge connection.
I certainly sort of glommed onto those sections of your book, Kendra, because it was such an obvious example of the awful things that can happen being justified by the greatest good for the greatest number. And I would have certainly used it in my classes had I had your book at that point.
That's a cool thread that connects all of our books is, and another job of the writer, as we were discussing, is to make people think, is to encourage our readers to think critically about what we as a culture are going to define as good.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
And how it is a choice.
Yeah.
Well, I
Hey.
hope it's a choice.
If you four are okay, I'm gonna end it there. I'm gonna be the one to drop in and say that I recommend these 4 books vehemently to our audience. You can purchase Mary's, Kendra's, John's, and Joanna's books at www.factandfictionbooks.com. You can purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. And while you're there, I urge you to donate so that we continue virtual programming like this into the fall with our MBF Plus events. And with that, I want to thank the 4 of you for joining us today and thank our audience for watching this video. I'll see and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.